Hey there, I'm Griffin. I play on the North American server, but I've served as a coach and analyst for teams on both the North American and European servers. I love the game to death. It's been one of my favorite things to do for years now, and I've also been pretty religiously following the esports scene for League. I've watched North American, European, Korean, Brazilian, every league I can get my hands on. I fall asleep to Twitch streams every night. So, love the game, love esports. It's just one of my favorite things to pick apart. In the daytime, I am an environmental science graduate student. I love to use statistics to work on ecology. I do predictive habitat modeling of coral reefs for my thesis work. And so it's really fun for me to be able to apply that knowledge into the game, even though it's nerdy as hell, but it's just one of my favorite things to do. So I decided to look at the games from group stages and sort of pick through those. So I looked through the statistics for those games. And I wanted to see if we could figure out some kind of objective measurements that we could use to get a bigger picture sort of comparison between these teams to look at the semifinals, quarterfinals, and really the finals, just to see who was going to win this thing, who looks the cleanest, because this has been the League of Upsets so far. We haven't had anybody playing in patches 5.16, 5.17 on a competitive stage. It's been really fun to watch all of the analysts and big personalities draw up their pick'ems and these big top 20 lists and all that, just to watch everybody get blown apart by crazy performances by guys like Cloud9 and the Flash Wolves, and it's been nuts, so I love it. But part of the reason things like this happen are because there's a lack of big international competitions for us to draw data points from. So all these casters and personalities are somewhat inherently biased towards their own region, not for any fault of their own, but just because that's what they're the most familiar with, and I don't think it's fair to expect them to have familiarity of the other regions on sort of that objective statistical level. But even if they did, like, there's just not enough data out there to have that kind of knowledge anyways. These kind of statistical comparisons are very hard to do just because of the lack of international competition. So that's one of the big problems, is that it's really difficult to compare across regions, and even now that we've had these group stages, it's hard to compare across these groups. Getting out of Group A is not going to be the same as getting out of Group D. I love the Flash Wolves in the LMS region, but it's real easy to go up against guys like CLG and Pain compared to Group D, where Orihen had to claw their way out against TSM, LGD, and KT Rolster. I mean, that's not an easy thing to do. And the statistics are going to show that. It's not the same to get, the same gold per minute in these situations. And another thing is that we've only had 6 games per team. I know what you're going to say, which is that AHQ got to play the 7th tiebreaker versus Cloud9, but I didn't count that. I wanted to keep my sample size to the same 6. So I only looked at the 6 games that each team played in the regular group stage brackets. And because of that, we do have a limited sample size, especially when you look at subs. I know Faker and EasyHoon subbed out, so EasyHoon only has 2 games on his record, which makes it really easy to have some distortion of his statistics. To try and pick apart this phenomenon and give me a more neutral, objective look at the game, I wanted to boil it down to 6 major statistics for every team, and the 6 I chose are Bloodthirst, and Bloodthirst is just a measure of kills per minute. Now, that goes with flexibility as number 2, and flexibility is just a count of the unique number of champions played. And I wanted to look at that to see, are you a player like Reckless, who's only playing 2 AD carries, and it was Kennen and Sivir through the entire group stage, or we have top laners like Huni, who played 6 unique champions in the 6 games. So I wanted to see that because, A, it could be a tip-off if they're holding something up their sleeve, but Also, just to show how adaptable they are, what their champion pool's like. Speed refers to the average time of their games across all 6. Objective control is one of my favorites. It's out of the total number of objectives taken in the game. And when I say objective, I'm exclusively referring to towers, dragons, and barons. So, between those 3 things, how many did they take versus the total number taken in the game? And if you think about that, what that means is, to have 100% objective control, you can't lose a single tower. And that's really hard to do. So some of these are close to 50-50 for games that go crazy like Fanatic versus AHQ, but then some of them can be 100%. I know SKT had multiple games with 100% objective control, and that's just scary. Objective focus refers to the number of objectives taken per minute, and I just wanted this in there to see, is this the kind of team that's going to like rush the 3-minute dragon? Do they always fast push their towers, that kind of thing? What's the pace of the game for these guys? Are they always doing something? Do they like to take it slow and farm? And objective focus, I think, is a good statistic for picking that apart. And vision, I looked at wards placed per minute for everyone on the team, and used that to sort of condense it down and get a composite ward placement score for every team in the game. With that said, I'm going to go through and pick apart the 4 semifinal matches, starting with Orihen versus the Flash Wolves. You'll notice here I have the statistics that I recorded for every player. I'm not going to read them all out, but I do want to draw your attention to a couple of things. One is that Stake takes a lot of flack for being, I think, a mediocre player. I've heard that criticism leveraged against him a lot. But if you look, his KDA has been pretty solid, and statistically he performs about on par with Soaz, so this isn't going to be the kind of blowout that you think. You know, Soaz does deal significantly more damage for his team, but his playstyle is geared to that. He'll play things like the Kennen and Vladimir, whereas Stake is the kind of guy that'll play the Maokai, you know, the tank, and soak up damage for his team. Maple had an amazing standout performance as an assassin compared to Xpeke, who played more of the control types of mages. But gold per minute wise, and even damage output wise, these guys have very similar statistics. So I'm not really expecting Maple to be able to pull crazy assassin moves on Peke, even though it is potentially possible. I think Peke is pretty well prepared for that kind of thing. The real disparity that I wanted to look at is in the bot lane. And maybe from the KDA it's not so telling. You could even look at the damage percent output for the team and say that NL is a beast for his team. The team loves to focus, you know, protecting him and having him be a major damage output source, but I think he's just outclassed by Niels. Niels' gold per minute really tells the story here. It is basically 60 gold per minute higher for Niels, and it just really adds up quickly. I think NL may be outclassed in this matchup. Looking at my 6 key statistics, you'll notice that the Flash Wolves are significantly more bloodthirsty, but beyond that, they have almost identical scores just down the line for everything. Very, very similar styles of teams, but the real tell for me here is this apples to oranges concept, right? Orihen had to climb out of Group D against KT Rolster, LGD, and TSM. And I want you to compare that to the Yowie Flash Wolves, who had to push out versus CLG, Pain, and Koo. And, I mean, the Flash Wolves looked great doing it, but I just think Orihen, with their experience and the level of opponents that they had to face to get here, is just going to take this matchup. NL had a great run, but I think he's going to be outclassed by Niels and Mithy. Similarly, I think Soaz's unique picks, off character for this top lane meta, might catch Stake off guard. But at the end of the day, I just think Orihen is going to be the better team for having to have climbed out of Group D. Moving on to KT Rolster versus the Koo Tigers. A little bit of Korea-on-Korea action. Down the line, I mean, this one's interesting. Smeb, I know he's got a pocket Riven and he could carry, but he really played tanks for the group stages pretty heavily. Interestingly enough, he did put out more damage for his team than Someday did. I don't know. This is a really tough one to look at. You have Nagne, who just didn't look that great. I did power rankings. That's the number on the far right side there. It's the composite ranking of how they did based on these numbers across everyone in the role. So Nagne placed 7th out of a total of 9 mid laners, including Faker and EasyHoon. His performance just wasn't quite up to par with most of the other players in this pool. I worry that Kuro may really get the better of him in this matchup, but that's going to be countered out, I think, by how heavily KT focuses their bottom lane. Arrow is tied for first place in his pool on these scores. Arrow was a beast. You look at his damage percentage, that's 33% of his team's damage is consistently done by him. That's across all 6 games. I know in one of his games, I think he put out something like 45% of that damage. So Arrow can be a beast, and Peekaboo is a phenomenal support as well. I'm worried that if Nagne is able to survive, and they put Arrow on a hyper carry like they love to do, KT Rolster may be able to really break ahead on this matchup. You'll notice in terms of Bloodthirst, they're similar, but the Koo Tigers are pretty higher above. Again, the Koo Tigers were in Group A, so it was an easy matchup for them to get out of, I think. Easier to shine in, I should say. You'll notice speed-wise, KT Rolster is almost 10 minutes slower per game, but they have better control while they do it. And I think that's pretty significant, even though it's only by 1%. For them to have that level of control given those long games is impressive to me. Objective focus, again, they play slower games, but their vision control is also better. And for that reason, I think they will be very successful in being able to protect Arrow and also get themselves into that later game where they're really going to shine. I think they've had to face pretty strong opponents to get here, and I'm going to give this match to the KT Rolster. On paper, it looks really close. In fact, when I first ran my statistics, the Koo Tigers are actually statistically stronger on paper than SKT. And that's crazy. That took a second. I wanted to throw away all of my work. It was like 30 hours of statistics when I saw this. And I had to really accept that the differences between these groups are substantial. And just given the playstyles and the way that KT Rolster loves to focus on their bot lane, I think KT is just going to be able to push through to the next round. But again, we don't have the data to conclusively make these kind of statements, so a lot of this is personal interpretation. I'm extrapolating based on experience, how strong I perceive the group to be, and who knows, maybe the Koo Tigers are actually the strongest team in this tournament. I don't think it's true, but I just do want to highlight that these are the kind of things that are statistically really difficult to answer. Moving on to Fanatic versus EDG. This is another really fun one, mostly because Koro is going to be stepping in for Amazing J, and already that's just a vacuum in my numbers. I don't know how Koro's going to perform. I've got nothing to even extrapolate off of from the group stages. I really don't want to go back and look at the regular season records, just because I don't think they're as applicable now that we're in this new meta. Who knows? Koro could step in and they could become the team that we saw at MSI. It's entirely possible. We could have an SKT versus EDG final, but I don't know that. All I do know is what the performances we've seen so far really are. And it's just to me, it looks like Pawn isn't the same guy that I saw at MSI this time around. With 387 gold per minute, he's one of the lowest mid laners in terms of ranking and gold per minute. I think he may actually be the lowest. You'll notice his damage output is fairly low. He's actually uncharacteristically high at warding. And it's also interesting for me to note that he's one of the few people who did play 6 unique champions in his 6 games. So he's a bit of a wild card, but his performances on these 6 champions just haven't been that stellar. So I'm a little worried there. On the flip side, Deft has been great, but, I mean, Reckless has very similar numbers, even though Reckless did not look that great. Reckless only played 2 champions. He really focused on utility. I didn't see him on any true carries. Sivir and Kennen were really designed to provide CC and speed boosts utility for his team. I will point out that Mako is perhaps one of the best supports at the tournament. My rankings put him actually at number 1. And Yellowstar has looked kind of lackluster this time around, so it's very possible that maybe Deft does hard carry from the bottom lane, but I know Reckless is able to play, Vayne and Tristana. The Tristana pentakill that he got in the playoffs to get here speaks to that. But he really will have to step it up versus Deft. That's a big deal. In terms of Bloodthirst, Fanatic is definitely ahead. Flexibility, they've both played the same number of unique champions. Fnatic is actually about 5 minutes slower than EDG, but they do have better control over objectives. Focus-wise, they're very similar, and EDG actually does have only slightly better vision than Fnatic. But in the end, I really do have to state that this is a personal choice, but I think Fnatic probably has this. It's extremely difficult to really say what Koro's going to do. He might revitalize the lineup, but he could come in rusty too, and that's a very real possibility given how weak China has looked at this tournament so far. But, EDG was really favored to get out of their groups. All they had to really beat to do it was H2K and the Bangkok Titans, who I think universally we could all agree are the weakest team in the tournament. So EDG pretty much had a free ticket out of groups. Meanwhile, Fnatic really had to claw their way out versus some very good teams, in my opinion. I think Cloud9 put up great numbers, even though they did have a one-dimensional strategy. Barring Deft really just stepping up and hard carrying it, and I think Fnatic's got it. I think they've put in the work. I think they had a harder time getting there, and, it's hard to say with Koro, but I think Fnatic looks better on paper, and they're probably going to take this. Moving into AHQ versus SK Telecom, we could go through and look at the statistics. I want to point out the rankings. You'll notice that almost universally it's rank 1, rank 2 for SKT. Their statistics are insane. I chose to list EasyHoon here as opposed to Faker because I've heard through Reddit that Faker will not be playing in this final, barring Westdoor pushing SKT to 5 games again. I don't see it this time around. SKT looks like they're out for blood. They look like they've cleaned up a lot of the problems I've seen from them in MSI. And AHQ is a team that I love to root for because they're so fun to watch, but God, SKT is just insane, and I think you'll see that on the next page. Significantly more bloodthirsty, more flexible, faster games, the control. Look at the control, it's just what I want to highlight. There were at least 2 games where they had 100% objective control. That means that the enemy team they played against got no dragons, no barons, no towers. Not a single tower. They had an average of 87.5% objective control. They have a fairly medium focus and very low vision. I do want to point out that Wolf is, I think, lowest in the entire quarterfinal stage. in terms of vision output for his team. But with this level of control and stomping, I honestly don't blame him. And as much as I love AHQ to death, it's just not even a question. SK Telecom is probably going to stomp it. I would love to see Westdoor do some crazy split pushing. Maybe they take a game. But I just, honestly, my gut's telling me it's going to be a 3-0 stomp for SKT. As a bonus, I've included my pick'em just to show you guys a bit of what my gut was telling me, but also to give you guys a good look at the statistics. And this is my first time really recording or doing anything like this in video format. So if you guys have any criticisms or any comments, I'd love to debate, your opinions. If you'd like to look at the statistics with me, please let me know. I'd be more than happy to share my Excel spreadsheet. This is the kind of thing that I love. So, if you guys ever want my input on things, just let me know. I'm on Twitter at @theproject0. I think my Reddit is GriffinLOL. Yeah, and I'll post this up on YouTube. So please comment, get at me. I'd love to hear from you guys. And thanks for watching.